I'm Soldano. I'm president of Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. Family Enterprise USA is an organization that promotes family businesses and their job growth in America. Policy and Taxation Group represents families, family offices, and family businesses around the country, promoting and helping them with tax and economic issues in Washington, D.C. We're really pleased to have with us today Linda Mack of Mack International, LLC. Linda and I have known each other probably 2 decades, and Mack International, LLC is a sponsor of Family Enterprise USA. We really appreciate sponsorship, and we really appreciate Linda being on this webinar today. The topic is recruiting and retention in today's marketplace, and I think it's a very, very important topic. The pandemic really frustrated all our family business owners, and they managed to weed through it, but it had significant consequences to their existing employees and also to their recruiting abilities. So again, very pleased to have Linda Mack on the call. Mack International is a premier boutique firm specializing in providing C-suite related executive search strategic consulting solutions to family offices, family investment firms, family enterprises on an international basis. Linda's clients range from first-generation business owning wealth creators, entrepreneurs building a family business for the first time, through multi-generational family businesses of 6 or more generations. Her experience across the spectrum enables her and her team to help families anticipate and prepare for those leadership challenges from generation to generation. So since founding the firm in 2002, Linda has built a reputation for guiding family clients, to quote her, get it right the first time, every time, making sure each executive search assignment is embedded in a proprietary, holistic, and customized consulting process. Linda was headquartered in Chicago. She has since moved West Palm Beach, where she is now, but her business, of course, takes her around the globe. So again, Linda, so pleased to have you on the call. Again, the topic, recruiting and retention in today's marketplace. So this is going to be a conversation, and I want everyone on the phone to understand that you are able to ask questions, make comments in the chat, as well as the Q&A. We will attempt to monitor that as we're going through this. Linda would like this to be interactive, and so would I. It's a little more difficult in these Zoom webinars, but please do that as best you can. And we're going to have a question answer session. So there will be no slides in this webinar. And I'm going to start with the first question. So Linda, let's just get into it. So we did all suffer and manage to get through the pandemic. So describe for us kind of the overall landscape today, how you see family offices, family businesses, and family generally dealing with the talent, retention, recruiting, and the trends that are happening in today's marketplace.
So, and we'll get into more specifics on each of those things as we go forward, Pat, but, from a big picture standpoint, in terms of the landscape out there, I would say it is extraordinarily competitive. I mean, it has also always been finding needles in haystacks to find the right leadership for family offices, which is where we specialize, but it is even more so now. But I do think that what that is doing, the competitive marketplace, is really pushing offices and family businesses to become much more professional, much more institutionalized in some cases with a small I, but much more planning oriented and much more professional in the way they go about recruiting and retaining their employees. It's just too important to get the right person, and you can't afford to lose them once you get them. So a number of things we're seeing out there. Number one, increasingly, as I mentioned, more professional arrangements, more sophisticated arrangements, increased use of employment agreements in many cases. We're seeing most of that still up at the very senior levels like CEO or CIO, but definitely the trend is becoming more prevalent there. Better defined plans for performance management and compensation. I'd say Gone are the days when people would shake hands and say, you know, trust me, we'll put the plan in place next year after you're on board. You're not going to land a candidate that way. Clarity in terms of performance expectations, metrics for success, increasingly important. Compensation is increasingly written compensation plans that are pretty clearly mapped out in terms of what you need to do in order to get the compensation. I think that's being driven very much by the candidates who are just lax to accept an offer unless they really have clarity around what the performance requirements are and what the compensation is going to be. More prevalence of formalized annual and long-term compensation and incentives goes along with that. On the annual bonus side of things, I'd say certainly, you know, well over 75%, and I'm going to be quoting from a 2021 survey that was done by Botoff Consulting with quite a large number of participants, family offices predominantly, but over 75% are formally paying annual bonuses. Now, they're still discretionary for the most part, but more are becoming better, you know, more defined with qualitative and quantitative expectations and then metrics for evaluation after the fact. On the long-term incentive side, I think, and this is really in the last 3 years, has really, the trend has accelerated quite a bit. The top 3 types of long-term incentives we're seeing most often in the market are: number 1, supplemental deferred compensation that may take the form of a grant on an annual basis with a vesting schedule. Second highest is co-investment opportunities. That would be in the family's investment portfolio. And often we're seeing this with a line of credit so that the individual can leverage their investment with basically a loan under that line of credit at the AFR rate, which is the lowest rate the IRS will allow you to provide and qualify as a loan. So we're seeing much more of that in the market now. And then carried interest, certainly very prevalent, particularly with very sophisticated investment-oriented families. But and that's, you know, really it's institutional practices, particularly on the carried interest, that are moving over to the private family office platforms increasingly. But I would say it's really we're seeing quite an acceleration of these trends in the market. You know, some families have philosophies about co-invest or not, about providing leverage or not. But I think, you know, it's one thing that definitely is being increasingly prevalent out in the markets. So our families are needing to be very thoughtful about what they're willing to provide or not, because that will seriously impact the universe of candidates they're able to successfully tap into. Certainly since the pandemic, remote and hybrid work arrangements. This is, you know, everybody is still feeling their way through this one. We have a lot of families that still want their people to be in the office, and they particularly want their leaders to be in the office 5 days a week. There are many who are allowing the more hybrid, you know, 3-day a week or whatnot kind of a work environment. And I'd be curious, just since Pat, you have the chat room, if whoever is on the line, if you were to just kind of put in your chat box, how many days a week your work policy or in the office policy is for your firm, whether it's 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. I don't know, Pat, can you see if anybody inputs?
Yeah. Okay. So person said 5, we've got 5, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week for CEO, CIO requirement, 5 days, 3 days, 5 days. So there's quite a few that are 5. I'm kind of surprised, and then 3s and 2s and some 4s.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting statistic. I was curious about that as well, Linda.
Yeah, and it's really a moving target. You know, I think that many families we're seeing want their senior leaders to be in the office to try to encourage the junior ones, and to encourage the junior people to come in because they'll get mentoring and they'll get training and they'll get more support, and they want the culture to be built, so people are going to want to gravitate back into the office. But it's an interesting phenomenon. I think most of what we've seen is people settle in around the 3 mark, but I
Okay.
think with a lot of people hoping that they can instill more people coming in. Retirement for planning for long tenured executives. Again, we're seeing more of this in the market. The trying to, and particularly with families, they typically want their key leadership to be with them for the long term. And, you try to come up with different kinds of programs and policies that will promote that. So I think we are seeing more and more retirement planning for long tenured executives. Again, the supplemental deferred compensation is probably the most prevalent tool being used there, but with a vesting schedule, but we're seeing more and more of that. More formalized governance, again, to attract and retain people. Candidates are really wanting to see that the family office or the family business has their act together. They've got boards, they've got formalized governance practices, they've got, decisions are being made on a very professional basis. There are committees, investment committees, whatever. But we're seeing more and more of that, and I think we're going to continue to see more of it. And I think that for those firms and families who have those governance structures in place, it enables them to be more successful in recruiting and retaining people. And then just overall, more formal recruiting and retention strategies. People can't wing it anymore. You really need to be very thoughtful about how you're going about recruiting people. And then once you've got them, how you're going to retain them. And we can talk more about that later, some specifics around what people are doing and their retention strategies.
Yeah. So Linda, you talked about incentive, different kind of incentive compensations. How about performance measurement or metrics? Do you see that changing? Do you see that becoming a little more professional? Do you see it being more institutionalized or being implemented at all in terms of the employee level that you manage?
Much more professional, much more quantified. I say that we are seeing it both in qualitative terms as well as quantitative terms. And I think that again is being driven by it's being largely driven by the candidates. Someone is not going to leave a place where they're successful and they know they could stay and go someplace unless they know pretty well what are the metrics for success, what are the performance expectations, and then the compensation goes along with that. So I think that, waiting till the end of the year and somebody gives you a performance review and you really don't know how you did until the time comes, I think those days are past. A lot of people, and we're even seeing it at the junior levels, people really want to understand, how am I going to be evaluated? What are the metrics you're going to use? What are the expectations and so forth? And I think the more clear people can be about that, the better the relationship. And that feeds into retention too. That will keep the employee as well.
So you're seeing more of that being done in family offices, because there was an era where that wasn't performance measurement wasn't being done at all, or even performance management being done.
Correct. And, we often, when we're talking with a family at the beginning, we're often asking questions like, okay, so we're sitting here a year from now talking about how this was a great hire. Tell me 3 things they've done that would cause you to say that. That's a metric right there. So there are ways, people have often said, well, I don't really know how to define it. Well, you really can. It takes some work, but, employ a thinking partner to help you do it, but it can be done. And it's really very, very valuable when you're interviewing the person and you can explain clearly what the expectations are for them. It helps you assess and it helps you select better. And then on the back end, it helps you retain them better. If what you're saying is expected and then they get what they expect to get because they perform. The other thing is, if you've got a high performer, they always want to beat the expectation and exceed it. So I think you get higher performance that way too. If you set a bar and say, this is what I expect, the performers that want to beat it will be able to beat it. And I think you're going to raise the level of performance in your organization overall.
So let's go back to trends for a second. So how do you see the kind of key requirements and characteristics for leaders of the future evolving? We talk a lot about the change in demographics in terms of the next generation, the X generation, Y generation? How do you see these characteristics changing, evolving over time for these future leaders?
Yeah, I think there's a big transition going on. I think that and again, I'm speaking more of the family office, and nothing is critical. It's just things are becoming much more professional, much more specific, much more strategic, much more proactive. Kind of gone are the days where you react. I mean, granted that, everybody and the constant is the service heart and being very service oriented to the family. But I think that what has changed and what we are definitely seeing is families want leadership that is very strategic, is very proactive. You're always looking out into the future on behalf of the family. You're anticipating what the issues are, what the challenges are that may be coming, either out in front or around the corners, if you will. So you are proactively thinking about that on behalf of the family. You don't want them to get caught flat-footed reacting to something when you could have anticipated it and planned for it. I'd say another big thing is that they're requiring leaders who really have strong business, financial, and investment acumen. This is much more the family offices we see, they are professional services organizations that provide a distinctive value proposition to the family clients. It doesn't matter whether they're small or large, but the mindset today is that you are leading a business. You're also a trusted advisor to the family members, and that's very important. But you're leading a business that should provide a value proposition that the family members that's going to resonate with the family members, and they're going to want to do business with the office. They got plenty of people outside in the market whispering in their ear all day, every day, come here, come here, come here. So I think that successful family offices need to really view themselves as a professional services organization that needs a value proposition that's going to encourage the family members to want to do business, choose to do business with the family office. And that, in fact, promotes better family relations as well. I would say high EQ combined with IQ, really important, and has gained tremendous importance over the last few years. And the pandemic just heightened the importance of EQ as well as IQ. Leaders, not managers, but leaders who inspire, who create a culture that employees want to be part of. Really important. And this we've seen, again, heightened tremendously as a result of the pandemic when people were working remote. You kind of want to view this as every employee you have gets up every day and has a choice whether they're going to come work for you or they're going to listen to another offer. So you want to proactively, really foster an environment and a culture that people are going to choose to want to be part of. And those are the effective leaders are doing that, and they're inspiring people. They're not managers in the hierarchical sense of the word. They're really leaders and managers who mentor and help people grow and develop. Technology is huge. Every family we talk to now is saying, I need someone who's technology savvy. Every family we talk to is looking for ways to become more efficient and effective in the way they do things. I would say if you took a poll a couple of years ago, the incidence of families doing things manually with spreadsheets and so forth was the majority, but that is really trending away from the manual days of old to, technology has become much more affordable and effective, and the increase in productivity and therefore savings in staffing costs, as well as the increase in accuracy and timeliness. We talked to one family recently and they said we can, our accounting people can do in 4 minutes what it used to take them 4 days to do because they've implemented systems. Everybody we're talking to is saying, what kind of accounting system are you using? What kind of investment reporting system are you using? If they're not implementing, they're assessing and looking at it now. And as I say, a lot of it is that it's affordable. When we used to talk to families in the old days, they'd say, well, the budget just won't allow for us to have any technology. Well, that's gone. There are affordable technologies, and it's almost today you can't afford not to. And you can't afford not to explore outsourced services. We're seeing a lot more families doing outsourcing bill pay even. because they figure it's just way too manual and way too labor and staff intensive to do it in-house. So I think technology and outsourcing have become ever more important. Generational transitions and succession planning, I think we'll talk about more later, but those are very important in terms of leadership for the future, being able to, and leadership in the office or the business, being able to effectively engage, educate, and so forth, the next generations. Smooth succession planning is really important to attract and retain as well. And finding leaders who are well networked. They can't live in isolation anymore. They've got to be out there, and they've got to be networked. They've got to know what other families are doing. They need to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, what kind of accounting system are you using? What kind of reporting systems are you using? They've got to be able to, bring best practice knowledge and market intelligence to their families.
Yeah. So what about attracting this generation? What about this younger generation? Do you have to do something different? Is the recruiting different for millennial or Y generation than it is for the boomers or generations before them?
I'd say it is and it isn't. Some of the things that are constant are culture fit for what we do. So, we're always looking for someone who has the technical experience and ability to do the job, whatever the job is. But culture fit with the family, families are looking for someone, still, this is the constant throughout time, whether it's an older or younger person or whatever the age may be. Families are still looking for someone who's going to be with them for the long term, and somebody who not only is going to have the skills to do the job, but is going to be the right culture fit. And when you get into culture fit, that is values, it's philosophies, it's communication style, it's, what motivates them, what do they really want in life. Now, granted, you'll hear people say, and I hear people say, the younger generation is more demanding. They don't have the work ethic that the older generation has. They want work-life balance, on day one. And what does that mean? So I think there are certainly challenges, but I think at the end of the day, it's really, you're really honing in on the culture fit dimensions that are going to make them a good fit. And, if work ethic is one of those things, then that's one of those things that you're going to be, looking for.
Yeah, so I want to remind everybody, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, put them in the chat. Linda's happy to answer them. I was recently at a workshop for Cal State Fullerton Family Business Center, and our topic was developing non-family leaders in a family office or in a family business. And how do you attract, first of all, those non-family business leaders to a family business? And we're talking about at the CEO, COO, CFO level. How do you attract them and how do you keep them?
I think it's a lot of the things that we talked about. I think that a big thing there, if you're talking about a non-family leader, is going to be governance. Okay. I've heard one person say, I'm not going to take that job. I don't want my future compensation tied to little Johnny's decision making, and he doesn't have any experience or knowledge about the business. So I think governance is really important there in terms of the boards, in terms of having, now, certainly you can have, obviously family members on the board, and we've seen many who are not necessarily steeped in the business, but they have surrounded themselves with other independent board members who are very steeped in the business. So you've got that professionalism going on. I think that's very important. And then I think a lot of the things that are just necessary to attract and retain a leader, period, is important. And some of those things involve a clear business mandate. What are the expectations of the job? What is having the authority and the resources to achieve the goal? Nothing more frustrating to a high performer than to come into a job and not have the authority commensurate with accountability, or have the resources you need to be able to get the mandate accomplished because you feel like you've got your hand tied behind your back. Personal and professional growth opportunities, always something very important if you're going to retain someone for the long term. In family offices and then often in family businesses, particularly where certain positions might be earmarked for family members. The ability to move up may not be there, but certainly there are ways that families can provide professional and personal growth opportunities. And that can be in a lot of ways that they can do that. They can be very creative in terms of how they do that. Competitive compensation and reward systems are certainly important. And I think that, certainly there are comp consultants out there. There's more survey information available these days, but I think that certainly the person needs to feel that they are being competitively compensated and valued for the work that they're performing. We talked about smooth family transitions and succession, really important that is handled, and the governance, as we talked about. Nothing worse than a non-family member coming in to lead a family business or a family office, and there's supposed to be governance processes in place, and they're part of the decision-making process, except the family's making decisions at home around the dinner table, and they don't know what decisions are being made. So, those are really important kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. And so I want to get into that in more depth, but I want to ask you a question around compensation, since you mentioned it. We are in this inflationary environment. Well, we all hope this is a short-lived environment. Has it impacted the compensation levels that you're seeing today? And do you think it's sustainable, or you think it's just a short-lived thing?
Two things. One, I don't know if anybody has seen it, but Social Security Administration just came out and said that they are factoring in an 8.7% increase in 2023 Social Security payments. So someone thinks it's more than just a short-term phenomenon, or they wouldn't be doing that. Because my guess is it's going to be pretty hard to take it away again. We have not yet seen it in the markets, but we're not yet at year-end, salary, bonus, and other compensation point in time. In fact, I'm working with Trish Botoff now on a survey that we're going to be sending out to families to try to get people to input their plans and expectations so we can get a better handle on that, because nobody really knows yet. The markets are very, very competitive. So we are seeing compensation rise, but I wouldn't say that we haven't yet seen it rise, because of inflation per se, other than because of intense competition in the markets. But I think that if this remains, it's going to play out in the markets. And I think the Social Security thing was a very interesting kind of leading indicator, if you will, about the fact that the government may be seeing this as a longer term thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, you talked about succession planning. It's always at the top of the list in terms of discussion topics for family businesses, family offices. It's always at the top of the list in terms of workshop and education events. Families all struggle with it. It is very difficult, no matter what generation the business is in. So talk to us a little bit about some advice on proper succession planning, especially as it relates to the family office heads, the CEOs, the CFOs. You mentioned governance. It's so critical. I absolutely agree with you. Both, family governance as well as corporate governance. So talk to us a little bit around the succession planning, how you do it with families and family offices.
Yeah. And I really do think succession, particularly family offices, are notorious for there's very little bench strength. I mean, there's only one CEO, there's only one CIO, there's only one CFO, and they don't have a lot of bench strength in terms of if they get hit by the car on the way or the bus on the way home tonight, is there someone internally who could be promoted to that position? Can they hold the fort down? Maybe. But I think that succession planning, and family businesses in many cases the same way, they just don't carry the levels of staff that they can have deep bench strength with someone ready to step up into that role if someone doesn't come back tomorrow for whatever reason. So I think that it's incredibly important for families to really look at all their key positions, have succession plans in place, and have them in writing, and have the accountable parties to implement those plans identified and know what their responsibilities are. if the time comes. And I think that you've got different types of plans. You've certainly got the immediate plan. What do we do if, Linda gets hit by a truck and she's not here tomorrow? What do we do? What do we do if, in a 3-month cycle, in a 6-month cycle, you're giving yourself time to have a temporary fix in place and then a longer term fix in place. But I think as a regular point of governance and so forth, families should be identifying all key positions and what are the plans for succession, immediate, short-term, and long-term for each of those positions, and who is going to be responsible for implementing those plans. I just think it's really, really important. We've seen too many people that all of a sudden, something happens. Maybe the person just accepted another job, or they for whatever reason, they're gone. People don't even know where the passwords are. I mean, there's a lot of things that are just proper business practice that go along with succession planning that I think people need to do fire drills. We've heard of people doing fire drills for estate planning purposes. I think people need to do fire drills for succession planning purposes. Where would you go to go find the successor? What would you do for the next 3 months or 6 months until you can find a successor? Are you going to outsource? Do you have any temporary people? How are you going to do all this? But all of those things need to be thought about in advance, and they really should be in writing, and the parties identified who are going to be responsible for implementing them. I think that, I just think it's critically important, because you can't afford to be out of business, so to speak. I think that having outsourced solutions for short-term needs can be a very viable way to go. Knowing some temporary people who could come in and kind of hold the fort down until you find a permanent solution. But again, I think having plans in place and having them in writing is really important.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. So you made me think of another issue that I wrestled with a lot in the family office industry, and that is that it always seemed that family members, and this is true for family businesses as well as family offices, don't get valued as much as non-family members. So in terms of compensation, in terms of benefits, in terms of just, quite frankly, respect, they're always viewed as the son or the daughter or the aunt or the uncle or cousin, before they're really viewed as a professional manager, a professional CEO. And so they used to be that they wouldn't be compensated as well. They would be kind of expected to take a lower compensation because they were a family member first. And of course, they should give of themselves. So is that changed, or is that still seem to be the bias?
Well, I think that there's a number of questions kind of in that one question. So I think that number one, I think that there needs to be an employment policy around how you qualify and hire family members and what positions you hire them for. I think if someone is simply placed in a position and they haven't had to qualify for it on the same basis someone else would need to qualify for it, they're not going to have the respect. You do run the risk they're going to be viewed as they just put, they put them in the job because they're their child. That's dangerous from a lot of standpoints. Number one, they may not perform, and there could be an issue with the company performance or whatnot. But I think you've also got a credibility issue, and you've got a big retention issue in the works there. I'd say that many of the families that we work with, number one, they have employment policies. And typically for a lot of the families we work with, they say that no family member is allowed to work in the family business or the family office unless they have worked and proven themselves somewhere else for at least 5 years in a totally unaffiliated company. Once they've got that experience, then they are required to qualify for whatever position they're being interviewed for on the same basis anyone else would be. And then I would say they should be paid according to what market competitive pay is for that position. And that is just good human resource policy and good management policy. I think where you run into difficulty is, and we're talking with a family now, the head of the family office, they're looking to hire a non-family member for the first time. They have a family member in the job now. He is not making any money. And we talked about what compensation for the person they're talking about hiring, C-suite hiring, CEO. And I said, how is the rest of the family going to deal with this? And he said, I don't know. They're not used to paying anything because I've been doing it for free. That's a rough first go when you're talking about big numbers, big ticket numbers for a CEO. We find it often in board positions that they'll pay outside board members, but they won't pay family board members. And, you know, so I think some of these things are changing, but I frankly think the proper policy and proper may be too strong a word, but the best practice approach is, you know, qualify the person for whatever the position is, whether a board position or a position in the family business or the family office. Qualify them as you would any outside candidate, and then pay them according to what market compensation, market competitive pay is. Here's a story that on the other side of that equation, there was a family business. They were in the manufacturing business. The father, the G3 father, was running the business, as had his father and grandfather before him. He was grooming his son, to come in as his successor. They did have this 5-year employment policy. The son went to get an MBA. The son went out to work in investment banking, and the son became very, very successful in investment banking. It then became time to talk to the son about coming into the business, into a leadership role, and start to become the understudy. And he was very well qualified. That was not the issue. The issue was his compensation, because he was being compensated on Wall Street investment banking terms and was very, very effective, very successful. And his father was considering him to come into a leadership role as a kind of one up, one down from him in the family business. And the compensation for that position was significantly below what he was currently earning. So the father had a really interesting dilemma. Do I pay him according to what he's earning in order to entice him to come into the family business? Or do I ask him to take a pay cut? Well, he made the decision that the only thing that he could do and maintain the respect and credibility of his senior management team was to offer the son the compensation that was appropriate, market competitive for the position, and not offer him the higher compensation. The end of the story was that the son turned it down because he didn't want to take the pay cut, and he didn't join the family business. And the father said that was the toughest decision he ever had to make. But he said it was, now the son came in later in a board capacity, so he was still involved in the business. But the father said it was the toughest decision he had to make. But he said, as a family business, you know, he has a lot of non-family members working in the business, and he felt that he would lose the credibility and the respect of the senior management team if he didn't approach this the way he approached it. So interesting dilemma on the other side.
Exactly. So we have a question in the chat and we have a comment in the chat. So going back to the salary inflation, are you seeing a lot of salary adjustments, not just at the C-suite level, but the staff level as well? What is the best way to know if you are competitive?
I'm sorry, what was the end of the question? How do you know?
What is the best way to know that you're competitive?
Well, first of all, we have not seen, I think there's a little bit of a lag in terms of when the adjustments are going to take place. I think we're close enough to fourth quarter and the end of the year that I think we're going to see it start to happen toward the end of the year. I think the way you're going to see it before that is if somebody, and it's not just inflation that's causing it, but if somebody tries to poach one of your employees and makes them an offer at a higher compensation level, you'll be faced with the choice of, do you increase, you know, do you counter offer or not? But that may not be tied to inflation. That may just be tied to somebody trying to poach your employee. So I think
you're seeing that not just the C-suite, but also the lower staff levels is what.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'd say we have not seen it yet, but I expect to see it. As I say, I think the government Social Security thing is a leading indicator of that, and we do expect to see it. I think families are grappling with it right now, what adjustments to make and when and how much. But I think everybody's looking at it. In terms of staying competitive, I think that there are compensation surveys out there. There are compensation consultants that can help you there and benchmark, positions that you may be most interested in, or benchmark the whole organization, however you want to go about it. That's probably the best way to benchmark it. Some people call 5 of their friends, but I don't think that's an effective benchmarking. Because the thing is, the surveys, when they're done by the professional organizations, they're really benchmarking based on content. And one of the issues in family businesses and family offices is you really can't benchmark based on title. We've seen so many instances where somebody's carrying a title of CFO, but they're really a controller when you really get into the content, or vice versa. So I think it's always very risky to benchmark according to title. So I think the best way to do it is to enlist the help of a professional compensation consultant, or find surveys to be able to use if you can get an apples and apples comparison in terms of content.
Right. So Pierre Dupont made a comment that compensation with family members, another issue. So when stock incentives are given to the non-family execs, is the giving of stock options or equivalent incentives to family members who work there versus non-family members who not. Family dynamics can make this challenging, even more so than the basic cash comp.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question, but I think if there are options given in the family business as a form of incentive, I think that it's, a lot of this is how the plans are constructed, because it's kind of like carried interest with compensation in some of the family offices on the investment portfolio. People will call and say, I really want to work for the family office instead of this institutional investment platform because they're long-term patient capital. And I say, that's correct. How patient are you? 20 years, 30 years? I mean, how patient are you? So I think some of it is because families, you're not going to get the realization until it gets sold. And if a family is investing in something and there's no reason to sell it or recapitalize it, how do you generate liquidity? Now, some families have put investing schedules and they put in periods where they can put, or you can put some portion of your carry back to them. I'd say in the question of the private equity, that's a tricky one. It's some families will create a different class of stock to get around some of that emotional issue, so that it's really not voting equity, it's more equity based on the value of the enterprise. So in effect, you somehow get a valuation and then you ascribe something to it, and that becomes what your value is. But maybe you don't have any voting authority. So if there's ever going to be a vote on whether the business is sold or not, your class of stock may carry compensation value, but it doesn't carry voting. That's one thing in the equation, but I think the other thing is, how do you measure it? And I think for most families we've seen, it's kind of like it's a valuation done at any point in time. I think the other things you got to take into account is what happens if the person leaves, what happens if the person dies, what happens if the person is fired, and so forth. But those are all things that are generally incorporated into the plan documents up front. Do they put them, at the end, if they leave, do you put the stock back, and at what value do you put it back to the family? Those are all kinds of considerations in designing the plan. But I'd say as far as the family member versus the non-family member and how that dynamic works, that may be partially a family culture thing, and it could be something about voting that could be addressed in the way you construct it.
So, we all suffered this pandemic in the last 2 years, and hopefully we're all out of it now. But what I hear from my family business owners is that obviously retention and recruiting has been a huge issue. It's actually in our annual survey for Family Enterprise USA, it was the top of the list of their concerns. But it has been difficult for them to recruit without increasing salaries. So they've had to really step up and pay more money. And subsequently, they've had to pay more money to their existing employees so that they can
Right.
match bringing on new employees.
Yep.
So have you seen that? And do you think that's going to continue? I mean, I don't suspect it's going to slide backwards, but how have you seen the pandemic affect salaries in general and benefits?
Well, again, I think it's in the process of happening as we're talking. So I think that 6 months from now, you'll have a much more clear sense of who's done what. But I think there's always going to be that internal equity kind of component that people are looking at. You know, if I bring someone in, you know, and particularly if it's the same job, because people talk about their salaries these days. You know, in the old days, people didn't talk about it. It was pretty quiet. But now, you know, you might as well post everybody's comp on the wall because everybody knows what each other is making. And if you can't defend what it is and explain it, then you're going to be at risk for retention. So yes, I think adjustments are being made to try to keep internal equity, so to speak. I think that, yeah, it's going to continue to be a struggle. And I think as inflation continues, it's going to be increasing pressure on compensation. And I think that that's where, though, but let's tie back to some technology kinds of things. You know, I think there are some ways that people can look at how can you manage, you know, costs in an era of rising compensation, employee compensation. And I think that's where some of this emphasis is coming from in terms of technology and how to automate, how to streamline, how to be able to do things in a more cost-effective and timely manner. That, by the way, also for a lot of families, they feel it increases accuracy too.
Yeah, good point. So you've talked about this already a little bit, but I'd like you to kind of talk to what are some of the key components of a good retention plan that you see today?
Yeah. And I would say that that's, you know, as we look at it, as I mentioned before, you need a clear business mandate. You know, when you come into a job, you need to know what is it I'm expected to do? You know, where's the bar? What are the metrics? What are the expectations? So I'd say a clear business mandate is really important if you're going to retain someone. As I mentioned before, authority commensurate with accountability, we call it, and the resources needed to get the job done. Nothing more frustrating to a high-performing employee, no matter what the job, is to come in and feel like this is what I'm responsible for accomplishing, except I don't have the resources to do it, or I don't have the authority to do it, or yeah, I'm accountable for this, but I don't have the authority. So I'd say, you know, that's really important to think about. I'd say that, you know, certainly we talked about competitive compensation and reward systems that are tied to the mandate and the performance expectations and so forth are very important. I'd say, you know, personal and professional growth opportunities. Again, there may not be a promotional opportunity, but there are ways to be able to horizontally, and I think a lot of people are dealing with that today. How do you provide growth opportunities? Maybe it's serving on a board. Maybe it's a special project. Maybe it's shadowing an executive and there's a mentoring training opportunity. You know, we've seen a lot of instances where somebody goes with the senior executive and they, you know, there's something that's productive for the company, but it's also very, it can be very stimulating for the employee as well. You know, and again, family offices and family businesses can be creative about these things. You know, again, the family governance and leadership transitions and all of those things, I think, are really important. We talked about that before, but that's real important if you're going to retain people. The thing that you brought up, Pat, you know, is it a culture where somebody's being placed in jobs just because they're family members, but they're not qualified to do the job? You know, we talk to people and they just say, I'm out of here. I mean, I don't want to work in an environment like this. I'm expected to be capable of doing the job I've been put into, and I think I have a right to expect everyone else to be held to the same standard. So I think that's very important. And then I think that, you know, feeling that the compensation systems are fair. And I think that goes for family members. They should be paid competitively.
Right.
So I think those are all things that are important. I think performance management plans that are clear and are consistent to be able to tell somebody at the beginning of a performance period what the expectations are and what the metrics for success are and how they're going to be evaluated is really important. And then to give constant feedback along the way. Don't wait till the end of the year and then, surprise them with something that they didn't do, that they didn't even know they were supposed to do or expected to do. So I'd say constant communication and feedback. I think mentoring is really important. People, a lot of people that we talk to, the reason why they won't leave where they are is, again, they choose to be part of a culture where they enjoy going to work. They enjoy the environment that they work in. It's collaborative. It's team oriented. They get mentored. They feel like they're developing as individuals, and so forth. Those are all very powerful things to, kind of look at it as they want to be part of the club, the culture that you've developed at your firm. Those are really powerful retention. People will give up comp in order to stay with the culture they like, because you can get more comp someplace, but if you're not happy and fulfilled, you're going to leave.
Right, exactly.
So those are very powerful things that families can do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And a lot of them have, family businesses in particular, have a wonderful culture. As we've learned in our survey,
Yeah.
Family businesses pay, 52% of them pay better in terms of salaries and benefits than their non-family business owners. So, and to your point, I think they do that because they want to create that kind of culture where employees are appreciated. So I'm going to ask you, I have a final question, but I'm going to ask you a quick question before we go there. And that is something that came out in the media this week, and that revolved around retirement. Some of the big corporations are, in fact, extending the retirement age requirement for their CEOs and top executives. Maybe they had a 65 age requirement for them to retire, and now they're extending that because they're learning that they can stay valuable and important to the firm past that 65. Have you seen that or heard anything around that age limit retirement?
Yeah, I think that's kind of in motion. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Because a lot of people have some things baked into their, the accounting firms, for instance. The partners have to require its mandatory retirement at age 60 or 65 in many cases. Some have bylaws that say mandatory retirement at certain ages. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The other side of the coin that we've seen are that, people who thought they were going to retire now are getting worried because of inflation and so forth. And so they want to stay in the workplace, and they want the employers to be responsive to them staying in the workplace. I'd say it's probably, a lot of firms would say it's cheaper to keep the person who's already in the job than to go out and hire a new person for a lot of reasons. One, you're going to get into competitive competition to go hire someone. You've got the downtime while you're waiting for the person to come in. You've got the upside in terms of the learning curve and the time and whatnot it's going to cost to get them up to speed and fully effective. And then you've got the retention risk if that's a factor. So I think there are a lot of reasons why it could make sense. A lot of people also say the older workers have great work ethic too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so this is my final question, so we can wrap this up. After 20 years plus of helping families and family offices, family businesses to recruit and retain employees, what has changed? How is it different today than it was 20 years ago? And what's different? What's stayed the same?
I'd say two things. One, what stays the same to me with families is that they are looking for long-term. They're looking for employees who will join them and stay for the long term. It's more like looking for your doctor or your whatever. That families tend to have that long-term focus, and family offices certainly do. They want it to be a good relationship that can last for 10, 15, 20 years. The other thing is that culture fit is paramount for success. You can get the most talented person on the planet, but if they're not the right culture fit for the family, it's never going to work out. Those things have stayed the same. I think what's different is just some of the things that we talked about before is that, families are needing to become more professional, more more strategic and so forth in terms of how they run their businesses and family offices in order to be able to effectively attract and retain people. One comment, though, I did want to mention, Pat, if it's back to when you were talking about family businesses, I'd say one other big difference I see between the family businesses, family offices versus large corporate America, public companies, is the family's desire to retain people through down markets like we're in. And I can speak personally, having had my own business in 2008, I took down every loan I could get on my house, on everything, so I could keep my employees, because I knew that they wouldn't be able to find another job if they were cut. So I think that families do have a culture characteristic in most cases. They really care about their employees, and I'd say that's in the context of what I've learned in 20 years, that families really do care about their employees. They really do care about their communities, and I think that that's a very powerful cultural distinction that makes them an employer of choice. So I think if some of these other things we talked about, if they can implement those as part of their, professionalizing the platforms, they've got a good leg up on the competition to be able to attract and retain.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We found in our survey, 90% of all family businesses kept their employees employed throughout the pandemic, even some of those that had to shut their doors. So you're absolutely right. That is a very different culture. I'm glad you pointed that out.
And I think it's good for messaging when families are out doing recruiting. I think that to focus on those things that are real positives about joining a family business or a family office are really, they're compelling to people. Because a lot of people are going to watch their friends get cut now as expenses go up and as business goes down. So I think that to remind them about how families are it's mutual loyalty and commitment to one another.
Exactly.
That's very distinctive. I
totally agree. Well, Linda, it's been a great pleasure having you on this webinar today. I think it's very valuable information. I know that everyone stayed on the call, so everyone really appreciates it. We certainly appreciate not only the webinar, but we appreciate your support of Family Enterprise USA. So thanks so much. And thanks to all of you that participated in the webinar. This has been recorded and we're going to email it out to everyone who was on the call. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate it.